Representative Jasmine Crockett just dropped an absolute bombshell that has sent shockwaves through Democratic Party politics, through Texas politics, through progressive circles nationwide. And folks, if you've been watching our coverage, if you've been paying attention to what we've been reporting for weeks now, this shouldn't come as a complete surprise, but it's still devastating nonetheless. Jasmine Crockett is leaving Congress. She's quitting. She's walking away from her seat representing Texas's 30th congressional district to launch a national political action committee focused on electing progressive candidates and building power outside the broken, dysfunctional institution that Congress has become. And the fact that one of the most talented, most effective, most principled members of Congress is looking at that institution and saying, I can do more good somewhere else. That should be a 5-alarm fire for everyone who cares about democracy, about progressive politics, about holding power accountable. Now, let me read you exactly what Crockett said in her announcement, because this is absolutely stunning, and it's a devastating indictment of where we are as a country. She released a statement this morning, and we've obtained the full text while state regime media is only running partial quotes. She said, quote, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to represent the people of Texas's 30th congressional district. I came to Congress to fight for justice, for democracy, for working people, and I have fought every single day. But I've also watched as our institutions fail to meet the moment we're in. I've watched as good legislation dies because of corporate influence and political cowardice. I've watched as we hold hearing after hearing exposing corruption and abuse of power, only to see no accountability, no consequences, no change. And I've come to believe that the most effective way for me to fight for the change we need is not from inside Congress, but by building power outside of it, by electing more fighters like us, by organizing communities, by creating the infrastructure for a real progressive movement that can challenge both the MAGA right and the corporate captured establishment." Can we just pause for a second and absorb what she just said? The most effective way for me to fight for change is not from inside Congress. That's a sitting member of Congress saying that Congress itself is not the most effective venue for creating change. That's absolutely devastating. That's a damning indictment of the institution, of democratic leadership, of the entire system. And you know what? We told you this was coming. We reported weeks ago on Crockett's interview with CBS News, where she was openly discussing leaving Congress, where she talked about evaluating where she could be most effective. We laid out the 3 paths she was considering: statewide office, media, and movement building, or legal advocacy. And now she's chosen the movement building path, launching what she's calling the Power to the People PAC, that will focus on recruiting, training, and electing progressive candidates across the country while building grassroots organizing capacity in key states. This is huge, folks. This is Jasmine Crockett, who just 3 years ago was one of the most exciting new members of Congress, who quickly became one of the most effective communicators for progressive values, who wasn't afraid to take on anyone regardless of how powerful they were. This is her walking away from Congress because she believes she can do more good outside of it. Let that sink in for a moment. Now, Crockett's announcement comes at an absolutely critical time. We're less than a year away from the 2026 midterm elections. Democrats are facing the possibility of losing even more ground to MAGA Republicans. The Trump regime is consolidating authoritarian power. Democracy itself is under assault. And one of our strongest fighters is leaving the battlefield, or at least leaving one battlefield for another. The reaction from Dallas from her constituents has been absolutely heartbreaking to watch. People are devastated. They're losing a representative who actually fought for them, who actually showed up, who actually delivered. And they're rightfully asking, why does this keep happening? Why do we keep losing good people? Crockett addressed this in her announcement. She said, "I know this will disappoint many of you who believed in me, who worked to elect me, who trusted me to represent you. And I take that responsibility with the utmost seriousness. That's why I want to be clear. I'm not leaving the fight. I'm changing where I fight. Because the truth is, we need fighters everywhere. In Congress, yes, but also in state legislatures, in city councils, in organizing spaces, in media, in legal advocacy. And we need infrastructure to support those fighters. That's what Power to the People PAC will do." Now let's talk about what this Power to the People PAC is actually going to do, because the details that have been released are fascinating, and they reveal a sophisticated understanding of what the progressive movement actually needs. According to the announcement and the initial materials released by Crockett's team, the PAC will focus on 3 main areas. First, candidate recruitment and training. They're going to identify and recruit progressive candidates to run for office at every level: Congress, state legislatures, city councils, school boards. And then they're going to train them, give them the skills they need to run effective campaigns, to communicate effectively, to withstand attacks from the right wing. Second, grassroots organizing and voter registration. They're going to build organizing capacity in key states, particularly in the Sun Belt: Texas, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina. They're going to register voters, build community power, create the infrastructure for sustained political engagement. Third, and this is really interesting, they're going to focus on media training and communications infrastructure for progressive candidates. Crockett has said that one of the biggest advantages Republicans have is their media ecosystem: Fox News, talk radio, social media influencers, podcast networks. Progressives don't have that same infrastructure, and candidates often don't know how to communicate effectively in the modern media environment. Power to the People PAC is going to address that gap. This is smart, folks. This is strategic thinking about what the movement actually needs, because the truth is we don't just need good people in Congress. We need good people running for office everywhere. We need organizing infrastructure. We need communications capacity. We need all of it working together. But here's what's really striking: the fact that Jasmine Crockett looked at all of this and decided she could do more good leading this effort than staying in Congress. That tells you how broken Congress is, how ineffective it's become as a venue for actual change. And she's not wrong, is she? What has Congress actually accomplished in the face of Trump's authoritarianism? Democrats passed some legislation when they had narrow majorities, but they couldn't protect voting rights. They couldn't hold Trump accountable through impeachment. They couldn't prevent January 6th. They couldn't stop Trump from winning in 2024. They couldn't prevent the catastrophic war with Iran. Now, that's not because individual members like Crockett haven't fought. But the institution itself is designed for consensus and compromise, and you can't compromise with authoritarians. You can't negotiate with fascists. The normal tools don't work against abnormal threats. So Crockett is doing what more progressives need to think about: evaluating where you can be most effective and being willing to make hard choices about where to focus your energy. Now, the reaction from Democratic leadership has been telling. And by telling, I mean it's been mostly silence. Nancy Pelosi hasn't commented. Hakeem Jeffries released a brief, bland statement thanking Crockett for her service. Chuck Schumer said nothing. The silence is deafening, because Democratic leadership knows this is a bad look for them. One of their rising stars, one of their most effective communicators, someone who could have been a leader in the party for decades, is walking away after just 3 years. And why? Because the institution is broken, because corporate money corrupts everything, because leadership is too old and too cautious and too wedded to a failed playbook. But instead of doing some soul searching, instead of asking, why are we losing talented young leaders? Instead of making changes to retain people like Crockett, Democratic leadership is just going to shrug and move on. They'll recruit some corporate-friendly moderate to run for Crockett's seat, someone who won't make waves, someone who will go along to get along. And that's exactly the problem. Multiple progressive commentators and activists have been weighing in on Crockett's announcement, and there's a real mix of sadness and understanding. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett is one of the realest, most talented people in Congress. The fact that she's leaving should be a wake-up call about how broken our institutions are. We're going to miss her voice in Congress, but I'm excited to see what she builds." Bernie Sanders released a statement saying, "Representative Crockett has been a fierce fighter for working people and for democracy. I'm sad to see her leave Congress, but I understand her decision and I support her vision for building progressive power at every level." Stacey Abrams, who made a similar calculation when she left the Georgia legislature to focus on organizing and voting rights, tweeted, "Sometimes the most effective way to serve is not from inside institutions, but by building power outside of them." Jasmine Crockett is making a bold strategic choice, and I'm here for it. And they're all right. This is both a loss and potentially a huge gain for the movement. Yes, we're losing an incredible voice in Congress, but we're gaining a national organizer, a movement builder, someone who's going to be focused full-time on electing more fighters and building progressive infrastructure. Now, let's talk about Texas specifically, because Crockett's departure is a huge deal for Texas politics. She was one of the brightest young lights in Texas Democratic politics. She was seen as a potential candidate for statewide office, attorney general, lieutenant governor, maybe even governor someday. Her departure leaves a significant gap. And here's the concern: who replaces her? Texas's 30th district is safely Democratic, so whoever wins the Democratic primary will almost certainly win the general election. But will it be another progressive fighter like Crockett? Or will the Democratic establishment recruit some moderate who won't make waves? This is going to be a huge fight, folks. Crockett has already endorsed a potential successor, her former chief of staff, LaShonda Marshall, who she describes as a fighter who shares my values and my commitment to the people of this district. But there will almost certainly be other candidates, including some backed by more moderate or corporate-friendly Democrats. The battle for this seat is going to be a proxy war for the soul of the Democratic Party in Texas and beyond. And we're going to be covering every development. Now, there's also the question of what Crockett's departure means for the Congressional Black Caucus and for representation of Black women in Congress. Crockett was one of the strongest voices for racial justice, for addressing systemic racism, for holding power accountable for its treatment of Black communities. Her departure is a loss not just for her district or for progressives generally, but specifically for Black representation. And the fact that a Black woman looked at Congress and decided the racism, the death threats, the constant attacks, the institutional barriers, that all of that made it more effective for her to fight from outside Congress, that's something we need to reckon with as a country. We make it so hard for Black women to serve in Congress. We subject them to harassment and threats. We hold them to different standards. We criticize them for being too aggressive when they're just being assertive. And then we're surprised when they decide it's not worth it. This is a systemic failure. And it's one that Democratic leadership needs to address if they actually want to retain diverse, talented leaders. Multiple Black women in Congress have talked about this. Ayanna Pressley has spoken about the toll that serving takes. Cori Bush has talked about the threats and harassment. Ilhan Omar has been open about the constant attacks. And now Jasmine Crockett is walking away after just 3 years. We're failing these women, and we need to do better. Now, looking forward, Power to the People PAC officially launches next month. Crockett has said she's already been in conversations with dozens of potential candidates across the country who are considering running for office. She's been meeting with organizing groups in key states. She's been building a team. And here's what's exciting. Crockett brings a huge national profile to this work. She has hundreds of thousands of social media followers. She's a regular presence on political shows. People know who she is, they trust her, they're inspired by her. That's going to help enormously in fundraising, in recruiting candidates, in building the PAC's capacity. This could genuinely be transformational if done right. If Power to the People PAC can recruit and elect even a dozen more fighters like Crockett over the next few cycles, if it can build organizing infrastructure in key states, if it can shift the center of gravity in the Democratic Party even slightly toward bolder, more progressive leadership, that would be huge. But it's also a risk. PACs are hard to run. Building infrastructure is hard, and there's no guarantee of success. What we do know is that Jasmine Crockett is talented, she's strategic, and she's committed. If anyone can make this work, she can. Now, folks, we're going to be covering this story extensively going forward. We'll be tracking Power to the People PAC's work, covering the race for Crockett's seat, analyzing what this means for the progressive movement. This is exactly the kind of story that matters, about strategy, about movement building, about where power actually lies. But we can only do this work with your support. Hit that subscribe button right now. We're pushing towards 7 million subscribers, and we need you to be part of this community. You may think you're already subscribed. Check right now. Make sure that button is clicked and that notification bell is on. Share this video everywhere. People need to understand what's happening, why Crockett made this choice, and what it means for progressive politics going forward. And if you can, please consider becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel. Your support allows us to keep doing independent journalism, to keep covering movement building and strategy, to keep following leaders like Jasmine Crockett wherever they're fighting for justice. You'll get ad-free videos, exclusive content, and the knowledge that you're supporting independent media focused on building power for working people. This is a huge moment for progressive politics, folks. We're losing an incredible voice in Congress, but potentially gaining a movement builder who can help elect dozens more fighters across the country. It's bittersweet. It's concerning, but it's also potentially transformational. Jasmine Crockett is showing us that the fight is bigger than any one institution, that power can be built in multiple ways, and that sometimes the most strategic choice is to leave one battlefield for another. Stay informed, folks. Stay engaged. And let's support the movement builders who are doing the hard work of creating the infrastructure we need for long-term change. Thanks for watching.